Hey everybody, welcome to Bura. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Jedi Fallen Order. Alright, welcome back. Before we start this video, I want to make sure that you like and subscribe. And if you have a Reddit account, please share this video on Reddit. Remember that this channel doesn't do a Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital products down below. And remember that every dollar that we get from the products that you buy below goes into making more content. The best way to help with this channel is to subscribe to Mammoth Interactive's huge library of content. Alright, so I've been gaming for a long time, and one of the games that I really like playing are those single player games with a huge and rich story. Now, of course, I like playing these games just like anybody else, but I also like playing different games too. Over the years, these long single player story mode games have become unprofitable, meaning that there has been no real business incentive to actually make these kind of games. And this makes sense because in the past, there were technical limitations that made these kind of games good. Now, technical limitations means that you have to borrow from some other part of the game. And one of the easiest ways to add in a huge amount of amazingness to your game is to have a rich narrative. Now, over the years, technical limitations have been solved and tastes do change. Now, it's no wonder that these big, long story single-player games have fallen out of fashion. And one of the biggest games that had a huge budget that was absolutely amazing to play that didn't do well financially was BioShock Infinite. That game was absolutely amazing, but it didn't live up to the financial expectations. The reason is that it's very difficult and very cost prohibitive to do this kind of game well. So I was very surprised to see that EA, which a few years ago said they were only making multiplayer games actually made a game that is single player and has a huge narrative. So I think it has something to do with how Battlefront 2 was handled. If you don't know, there were some issues over the loot boxes being very predatory, and as a result, EA was taking a complete 180 on it. Now, I hope to see more games like this because Jedi Fallen Order is a really good game, and I'm going to give you the review. But before I give you the complete review of this, let's talk a little bit about how these games are made from a developer's point of view and why they're so expensive. Now, one of the things about these single-player games is that they basically take a lot of time in level development, and level development is a huge time sink. So in game development, coding is the number one thing that will take a lot of time. The second is the art itself, and third is the level design. And sometimes the level design will take more time to perfect than the art. Now, the level design in Jedi Fallen Order is amazing, and the fact that they reuse some of the sets is also really good. Now, if you want to make a game like this, the more you can reuse sets, the better. A good example would be Star Trek. Now, Star Trek usually runs 7 series, and what they would do is they would start off with the sets and everything designed at the beginning, and then they would work in stories and interesting things around it. Maybe they would do a redesign from season to season. Essentially, the set itself was created at the beginning, and that way it would save on time. Now, as game developers, you could probably do something similar to that. If you had a game where you flew around on a ship and went to world, that would actually be very cost effective because you would have to design the ship once, and it could in theory last for 7 seasons or 7 iterations of that game. Now, TV shows in the past were on huge budgets, and they had to find every single little trick to make things profitable. The game industry, especially if you want to make these single-player, story-based games, has to be done the same way. Now, not only is the level design cost prohibitive, but one of the things that has really changed and why you don't see a lot of these games is that tastes have simply changed. People want a more dynamic experience, and you can see these with, for example, Zelda Breath of the Wild or the Assassin's Creed game. People want an open world where they can go and do things here and there. But one thing that I've always disliked about open world games is that it's too open. Now, I love playing an open world game here and there, but sometimes I just want a straight path, and Jedi Fallen Order does that. It gives you on a straight path where you can do things, and think of it like an interactive story. Now, one of the best examples of this is Mass Effect, and the Mass Effect series had a choose your own adventure. Now, that is a lot more complicated than what Jedi Fallen Order did, but I do like playing through a game in a story type way. And Jedi Fallen Order basically puts you on a path, and sometimes you can take different paths, but it's not boring. And the level design in Jedi Fallen Order does this so well that I never really felt bored playing it. The big problem that a lot of developers have with these games is that you go from A to B, B to C, and C to D. And what happens is that the player says, okay, well, I gotta do this, and then I gotta do this, and then I gotta do this. And that's super boring. Now, the easiest way around this is to just mix things up, and Jedi Fallen Order does a lot of this very well. There are parts where you can surf, there are parts where there are battle, and then there's parts with story. And the story part is where I really want to focus in on. So since Star Wars is a movie, it's impossible not to talk about movies here. Now, some movies are very plot driven and not very action driven. In fact, some people will go see a movie that's purely action, and other people will go see a movie that's purely plot driven. Now, these games are somewhere in the middle, where there's very interesting plot and a lot of action. Now, I would guess that if you made the plot and the exploration of this a little bit better, I think that it would be a very immersive experience. One of the things that BioShock did very well is that you could listen to logs as you played the game, and I really think that this is a good design tick. So if you want people to be immersed in your world, then you can give people something to listen to while they're exploring. And I think this is done really well. Now, Jedi Fallen Order does this very well, but I wanted more of this. In fact, I wouldn't be very surprised if there was a game that came out where it was more focused on the exploration and developing the world from a more story point of view, that it would be fairly well received. Whether it would make money is a different issue, which is again the core problem is why you don't see a lot of these games. It's perfectly possible to have a product that's absolutely amazing and fail in the marketplace. This happens to every business at every level. So there were parts in Jedi Fallen Order where you got to explore some of the world and explore some of the lore around it, and I thought that was really good. And being a Star Wars fan, I actually got to expand upon what I saw in the movies and read in the books. I think this is really awesome, and all IP holders should take note of this game. So let's talk a little bit about the action of the game. Now, the action was done insanely well in this game. In fact, I felt that the action was for the most part fair in a lot of cases. However, I did feel that it was a little bit too hard in some circumstances, and that the game was purposely a little bit harder than it needed to be just because it was a little too short. Now, I personally didn't think that this game was too short. I thought it was just the right amount, but I know that there are some people out there that would say this game is way too short. Remember, you can't judge these games on something like Overwatch because they're two totally different games. You'll get hours of enjoyment out of Overwatch where you'll only get a certain amount of hours out of this game. But back to the action. So I started on the normal level, and then I moved it up a bit, and then I moved it down a bit, and eventually I moved it all the way down to story mode, which I thought was a little bit too easy. In fact, the reason that I want to talk about difficulty is that the cheap way to extend the game is just to increase the difficulty level. In this game, if you do it very well and you're very good at gaming, it doesn't really feel too unfair. But however, there were some parts where I said this was insanely too hard for me, and it felt like a little unfair. I think they could have done a little bit more to replenish your health. You find these crates all over the world, and it would be great if you got some health replenished when you open some of these crates, or at least some kind of stim to help you replenish your health. But for the most part, the action in this game felt really good. I think the best part about this action is that you got to have a double-bladed lightsaber, which I think was really awesome, and I totally didn't expect that, but in retrospect, that was a completely obvious choice, and I'm glad the dev team made it. So let's talk about the story and the character. So you basically get to play as one character here, and you get to go through a story. Now, the story is really good, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but there are some characters that come from the regular Star Wars universe in this game, and when they do show up, it's absolutely amazing. Now, I was glued to the story from start to finish. It starts you off in a very good spot, and then overall, as you explore the world, you get more tidbits about the lore and how everything unfolds. At the end of the game, I felt that the story was very well told, and I thought that it was absolutely amazing that I got to experience it. Now, I hope they make a sequel of this game, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. Let's hope that it's a commercial success. Now, the other thing that makes this game successful is that it has a limited scope. Now, a lot of people might not like that, especially if you like open world games. If you like open world games, you're used to this unlimited scope almost. But for this, there's only a few planets that you can travel to. You can travel to these planets in any order, which I think is a really good design decision, because if you can travel to planets to go explore a certain area that you just required a new skill that you can get to, that gives the player some agency. So this game does agency versus putting you on a path very well. So if you are designing this kind of game, you don't want to put them on a train track and go. You want to make sure that there's times that they can stop and then maybe go to a different location. And I thought that this was very well done. Now, each of the planets have their own distinct mood, and I thought the design of the level was pretty good, because you don't go to one planet and you leave it forever. You come back to that planet, and what's interesting is that you might go to something else, and there might be an ability that you've acquired on a different planet that is used on another planet, and I thought that was really well done. Now, one of the first planets you go to, you come back again and again and again, and every time you come back with a new skill and there's a new area to open. Now, let's talk about some of the things I didn't like. Now, the number one thing that a lot of people didn't like is that the game is a little bit buggy. Now, as a developer, I'm surprised that all of these games get released with so few bugs anyway, because on these big teams, it's very hard to release the bugs, but I personally noticed a few bugs, and luckily I didn't have any game-breaking bugs. But there were a few parts where I definitely had to work through the engine because it was a little bit buggy. Now, hopefully these get patched. So there was a few bugs and a few environmental spots where I thought that was really a bit too challenging, and it really wasn't my fault. But the other thing that was really difficult in this game were the controls. Now, the controls, for the most part, felt pretty good, but there was occasions where I would either fall off or there was some kind of thing that it didn't quite respond the way I wanted it to, and that kind of hindered on the gameplay. Now, the controls were pretty good, but at the same time though, it could have been better. Controls are something that are really, really important when you're developing a game, because if your controls aren't good, people are going to notice, and people frankly aren't going to like it. The best controls are when the player feels like they need to execute a jump and it executes perfectly, and lots of times you have to add in extra lines of code to actually make that work. And there was a few parts, especially with the running on walls, where it didn't quite work out the way I wanted it to. Luckily, in part of this game you get a flip, which makes things a little bit easier, but sometimes there were parts where I had to do 2 or 3 times and it didn't feel like I was the problem, but the controls were a bit of the problem. Overall, I didn't find that there was too much wrong with this game. If anything, the controls, the bugs, and maybe the difficulty were probably the biggest turnoffs of this game. So in conclusion, Jedi Fallen Order is a really good game, and I hope to see a lot more of these games. For me, it's like wrapping myself in a novel. You know, if you read a book and you can't put it down until you're done, this is the same feeling I get when I play these games. Hopefully the business case can be made for these kinds of games, because I would like to see more of them. The story is really good, even if you're not a Star Wars fan, but if you are a Star Wars fan, I think it's awesome to play before the next movie comes out. So overall, I would recommend playing this game. If you really like story-based games, this game is for you. Alright, so that concludes this channel. Did you like Jedi Fallen Order? Please comment in the comments below. And if you like story games, I want to hear your comments. Remember that this channel doesn't do a Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital products down below. And remember that every single dollar that we get from the products that you buy below goes into making more content. The best way to help with this channel is to subscribe to Mammoth Interactive's huge library of content. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in another video.